So Ali, thanks for joining us. I was really excited about this. I love doing these. People have been walking around the conference. They're like, "You're doing a lot of these firesides." I think you even
It's a
said
two marathon.
you even said the same thing. And I always say like, these conversations are the exact conversations that I would have at someone else's conference.
Yeah.
In like 20-minute clips, but they're always fun. They're always like entertaining, and you might as well do them on stage. So this one I'm really excited about because I think. ZK has been, I think, a transformative innovation. It's come a long way, the cryptography and everything, and we hear it as a term thrown around, and it's got a lot of hype around it.
Yeah.
And really, like different people talk about zero-knowledge proofs and kind of ZK technology, and you talk about like 3 or 4 or 5, however many different things. Everyone's got their own like, kind of idea of what it is and how it's going to be applied, and you guys are extremely bullish on this. I know you are individually. Why don't we just start by like the quick speed run, like 30 seconds a minute on like ZK, how far it's come, kind of where it is, and then we can get into some of the applications of it that you're excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and thank you for having me. It's really good to be here. It's amazing what you guys have put together. And yeah, great to be here chatting with all of you. So ZK, I think even though ZK is so like hyped up and like people really talk about it quite a lot, I still feel like it's an underrated technology. And the reason for that is that it is so fundamentally general. And so maybe to zoom out just a little bit of the history of where ZK comes from, it actually comes back from this long lineage of verifiable computation, which actually dates back to the 80s. And it was actually like this relative backwater of computer science for a very long time, because the need to actually verify that a computation was performed in a particular way, in a way that is trustless, didn't really emerge in full force until crypto became a thing. And so in a way, the emergence of blockchains, the emergence of Ethereum in 2014, the emergence of decentralized computation, the need for permissionlessness and trustlessness in distributed systems became like the holy grail application for ZK, which is as a result caused ZK to improve dramatically, because now there's real demand by all sorts of different parties, lots of entrepreneurs, lots of people building things in this space. And there's also a lot of money involved, because crypto injects a business model into some of these open source techniques that previously were just libraries and they were mostly academic in nature. And so now I think in the recent, the last like 7 years since Ethereum became a thing, the rate of advance in ZK tech has been insane and has improved many, many orders of magnitude. And the main thing that ZK proofs let you do, like there's like the academic definition of what ZK proofs are, but the main practical benefit that they provide for the space is that it allows you to essentially outsource a workload, something like a computation, to a third party who may not be trusted, just anyone out there, who can then perform the computation for you and then create a proof that they did that computation correctly. And then anyone can take the proof that results from that and very efficiently verify it. And also, crucially, the proof is small, and so it can fit within the context of a blockchain. That's what like a snark is, and then there's a ZK aspect. So people tend to conflate what a sort of a piece of verifiable compute is with what zero knowledge means. Zero knowledge tends to relate to privacy. And so the fact that you could, using a zero-knowledge proof, hide some of the inputs or outputs of a computation is what makes it a zero-knowledge proof. That's what like zero-knowledge proofs are. And because of the dramatic improvement that they've undergone in the recent years, they've started to really figure into many different parts of the stack in the crypto world. And we can talk a little bit about like the various applications, what people are doing with ZK.
I wanted to start with that because if I polled the audience and I said, who here knows what zero-knowledge cryptography is, you probably would have seen a bunch of hands raised, and if I had cold called on any of them, they wouldn't have answered that way. And they certainly wouldn't have answered as concisely. So I think that's a good kind of like table setter. It really comes down to interoperability, scalability, privacy, right? Like those are, I'd say, broadly the 3 pillars that I think you and I are both excited about when we think about this technology. I know you have a couple slides that kind of walk through how you're thinking about these different parts of the ecosystem. So maybe we can we'll start with the first one and kind of jump off, ask a couple questions from there.
Well, so actually, I think the only slide we've got is just essentially
Perfect.
data about the momentum that ZK has in the recent past. But certainly we can talk about the three major infrastructural areas in which people are using zero-knowledge proofs to dramatically reinvent the way that the crypto stack works. One way of thinking about this is that traditionally, before crypto even existed, just as a way of framing why zero-knowledge proofs as a building block are so fundamental, before crypto, there was one mechanism that existed to enable cooperation between parties who don't trust one another. And that used to be a centralized third party, an intermediary that both of the parties that are trying to cooperate trust. Right, so that's the kind of the Web 2 model, is the model of like traditional finance. And crypto, what crypto did is that it created now more of a spectrum of different mechanisms for enabling people to cooperate with one another without necessarily having to depend so much on that centralized trust model. And the spectrum on one end has that model that you can still use the Web 2 trusted model as a way of cooperating. But now, with crypto, you can also use game theoretical approaches where you can have a group of people who are incentivized to behave in a particular way and who are also incentivized to work together and check each other's work as a way of enabling something like consensus, in the case of like a layer 1 blockchain like Ethereum. And then there's also, further along the spectrum, there's cryptography. Like cryptography helps you create proofs about statements that you don't have to trust any other human to believe. But cryptography has traditionally been very specific in that it lets you prove only things like this person signed this particular blob of data, this person hashed this particular blob of data in a particular way. There's like very specific things you can normally do with cryptography. Zero-knowledge proofs are a complete generalization of that, in that instead of just being able to make statements that are very specific, you can now prove general purpose computation. And so as a result, as zero-knowledge proofs gain momentum, they will tend to take on more and more of the work that happens in the space. The kinds of things that normally are done in a game theoretic way will now start to be done in a cryptographic way because zero-knowledge proofs are now more powerful. And the first example of this is scalability, where today, the way that we do verifiable computation on a blockchain like Ethereum is to just do game theoretical consensus. In a sense, we're building the VM into the consensus of the blockchain, which means that every single node in the network has to perform every instruction of every computation. And the way that we get certainty that the computation was run correctly is that everybody runs the computation. But of course, that's very inefficient, right? It creates an enormous amount of duplication of work. And instead of doing that, you could have a single node run the computation. That computation could be very expensive. It could have all sorts of interesting operations. It could be even a machine learning workload. As zero-knowledge proofs get better, that kind of computation could become richer and richer. And then that node would produce a zero-knowledge proof that they did the work correctly. And then everyone else in the network, all they have to do is verify this succinct, very efficiently verifiable proof. So that is a fundamentally better architecture for a layer 1 blockchain that offers verifiable decentralized computation. And as zero-knowledge proofs improve, then the costs of generating these proofs, which today are the bottleneck, go down. Then I think that'll become the more natural architecture to move towards. And blockchains like Ethereum may move in that direction. Other blockchains might also experiment with that, or there are new blockchains that are being built entirely with zero knowledge in mind, and have essentially just gone back to the drawing board to design a blockchain with zero-knowledge proofs as a basic building block, which did not really fully exist back when Ethereum was designed.
Let's talk a little bit about interoperability as a component of that, because I think people have started to realize that the scalability aspect is, in some respects, that's probably the area that's getting the most investment and attention right now, because private transactions, which we'll get to last,
yes,
are having a moment that they're under siege and under fire, I think, in general. But I think the interoperability side of that non-private transaction coin is just as interesting. So are these applications, or is this all kind of root infrastructure that you're talking about? Obviously, scalability usually those investments are going to be around like the infrastructure layer, but are there any applications or is interoperability and some teams working on the interoperability component of ZK a little bit more like user facing and kind of front and center? How will people experience like ZK when it comes to interoperability?
Yeah, well, so one of the fundamental ways in which ZK is playing a role in interoperability is in helping different blockchain ecosystems bridge and be connected to one another. And the way that would manifest for the end user would be the ability to say move like assets on Solana to assets on Ethereum, for example, or also to move assets back and forth between layer 1 and a layer 2, like Optimism or like a ZK rollup, like a ZK Sync. Mm-hmm. And the way that, I think if you think about the spectrum that we talked about, there's maybe 3 different mechanisms you could use to try to enable that interoperability. One of them would be to just trust someone, to be like the arbiter. You send them the assets, and then they spot you assets in the other chain. That's basically what a multi-sig bridge would be. And that's what many bridges between chains today are. There may be something in the middle where you have more of a committee, and there's like a game theoretic incentive to get people in that committee to behave and to actually act in the interest of the users and of the network. But there's also the more kind of principled approach, which would use cryptography, would use zero-knowledge proofs to enable one chain to become certain about all of the behavior and actions that happen on another chain using a zero-knowledge proof, and to enable a bridge that's completely trustless and seamless. The experience of the user wouldn't really change all that much, but the security of the system would be far greater. So maybe the one way in which it would change is that there would just be fewer hacks. There would be fewer incidents like, let's say, like the Ronin hack, or like there are many major bridges that have been hacked because it's just so hard to get them right. Mm-hmm. And zero-knowledge proofs as a result, I think they can really help make the space more secure.
So when you look at the investment landscape, are you heavily concentrated in those first 2 buckets right now, or are you doing things on the private transaction side and the Zcash and all of its descendants, let's call it, side of the house?
Privacy is also extremely interesting to us as well. That's the kind of the final element, the final angle to zero-knowledge proofs, is that they can enable verifiable computation in the way we've been discussing, but they can also add this dimension of privacy, which isn't really possible in the game theoretical model, and certainly isn't possible in the centralized model. And so using zero-knowledge proofs, you can build blockchains. Like the best example of this historically has been Zcash, where you can use zero-knowledge proofs as a way of building a private payments blockchain. But you can also use zero-knowledge proofs to build a smart contract platform that's just as programmable as Ethereum, but where the state of the smart contract and the identity of the users who are interacting with those smart contracts and the inputs and outputs to those programs are completely private. And good examples of projects in that category would include Alio and Aztec. Aztec actually just launched its sandbox yesterday, which is it's basically like a local DevNet that you can run on your own machine to begin to experiment with this new technology. And we believe that this is essential. Like, privacy has to exist in order for crypto to become mainstream, because without it, you're just confined to a very small subset of applications that can work with everything being visible to everyone. And if you think of
every single transaction, but publicly defaulted to like the Venmo,
exactly,
your friends, right?
That's right. Yeah, if you think about the financial system, there's a very small fraction of the financial system that would work in that setting.
And it's not just kind of individual liberties, right? Like, I think we have constitutional protections, and we should fight tooth and nail on some of these things in court. To be honest, Tornado Cash we'll get to maybe in the last few minutes, but it's more than that. It's institutions can't expose their customers' transactions on a public blockchain without some type of ability to kind of cloak that and kind of hide any forensics that would potentially put that customer data at risk.
Completely.
You guys are invested in Nansen. No hard feelings, but you guys are invested in Nansen. Great company. I love Alex. But what happened? Like, one of the benefits, and we have this obviously with our on-chain data at Messari. Like, I think the community has benefited historically from being able to see all this activity directly on chain.
Yes.
But at some point, we go from like HTTP to HTTPS, and like most things become shielded. How do you think about the ability to like analyze the ecosystem and kind of come up with this balanced approach to too much privacy is like scary conceptual level because it's just like, okay, everything is a black box. We've created this peer-to-peer economy where like everything is totally away from view. How do you think about analyzing on-chain activity, or when you think about either analytics companies or compliance companies, or anything there? Where is this intersection? What's this intersection going to look like in 5 years if we get to the point that 80% of transactions are private by default? They're shielded, on the major networks, and we've got that balance right. Like, what are we going to have to get right at an infrastructure level to actually still be able to use these networks and not feel like everybody is just blind? And then you'd think we have problems now in DC. Geez, like if we have 80% of transactions on chain are like totally out of touch because of ZK, that's going to be a very difficult policy conversation.
Absolutely.
So it's got to be like analytics and the lawyers working together to figure out how we're going to thread this needle.
That is a fantastic question. It's very timely as well because we've actually been working with our privacy-oriented portfolio companies, and we've had people from our regulatory legal policy team along with people from our research team, including Dan Bonet from Stanford, who kind of invented a lot of the relevant cryptography, to really try to figure out how to use the cryptographic tools, which give you lots of levers, right? They give you lots of flexibility to design a system that allows you to expose certain things, hide other things, allow you to prove that certain things are true without exposing them, that gives you enough expressive sort of ability to come up with a system that satisfies the constraints that we live under, right? That allows people to continue to have privacy over their own transactions and over their own activity on chain, but also has enough visibility that they're compliant and that they can satisfy the requirements of the various governments in which they may exist. And that's a super interesting question. It's like unclear what the right answer is and how you use the tools in order to actually design the right system. But the beauty is that these tools are much, much more expressive than the tools that we've had before. Because before, there's only two options. Either you have your stuff private because like some company holds it, like a bank holds it privately for you, or it's fully public, where the bank is subpoenaed and they have to basically give all of your information to the government. And you don't really have much in between. You want to prove your identity or you want to prove something about yourself. The traditional model is the KYC model, where you just give the challenging party everything that corresponds to who you are. The cryptographic approach would be one where you can actually prove something about yourself or your financial position or anything about your account on chain in a way that does not necessarily reveal everything about you. So it's a great question, and I don't think that there's a good answer yet, but like one of the exciting areas of research here is to figure out how to best use the tools to find the right answers to some of these questions.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this basically since day one at Messari. I mean, we started with the disclosures framework first because in some respects, I was very publicly, and people laugh at me and dunk on me all the time, very publicly excited about Zcash, and the price has not exactly followed the enthusiasm around ZK. That's fine, but I think the thesis about ZK was right, and I made an error early on with Messari in being about 10 years ahead of where things were actually going to be in terms of like on-chain analytics. I was like, we're going to spend all this time and money and all this infrastructure, and then everything's just going to be private, and we're going to be back to the disclosures kind of norm, and we're going to need something like ZK power disclosures. Right. And I think we're probably narrowing that gap, but there was a 6-year period where we should have built more on-chain infrastructure. We're catching up now. So happy to work with you guys on that, and Dan's great. So last lightning round question, because we've got 30 seconds left, and then we're going to bring up another bald man on stage, which I know everybody is, the parade of bald men today on the stage has been incredible. Privacy pools. We just saw Amin speak earlier today. Sounds like you guys have looked into it a little bit. What's the closest thing you've seen to a proposal that can thread the needle? Is that it? Do you think Amin and Vitalik and these guys are onto something, or do we still have work to do to be able to actually have private transactions without everybody default going to jail?
I think we still have work to do, and it is part of the work that we've been doing as well. And I think the whole community has been finding the answer. And I think there's two parts to the problem. One part is how to satisfy the actual compliance requirements and regulatory requirements. The other part of the problem is a more practical problem, which is how do you actually prevent the bad activity or mitigate it in a significant way, create a strong enough disincentive for it to happen such that most of the activity on these protocols ends up being legitimate. Because if that is the case, if the practical reality is that people are using the technology in a legitimate way, then that ultimately, I think, would override whether the law of the kind of the compliance regulation necessarily applies or not. I think like the protocols that end up actually facilitating money laundering for North Korea, for example, regardless of whether or not they technically comply, will be under fire, right? And so I think we have to kind of figure out both how to comply technically and then also how to practically mitigate the bad activity.
Absolutely. Ali, I'm glad we made this work. It's a pleasure to see you again, and we're going to be doing a lot more with ZK, some behind the scenes, but I know a lot of folks are going to be at the cutting edge here. So those graphs are one of the few things that I've seen that's up and to the right consistently in crypto. Everything else is a little bit more messy than that, we'll say.
Thank you for having me.
Ali, thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
We'll let you go. All right.